Hello, this is Garth Spencer with another episode of The Garth Spencer Show. Tonight's episode is about complexity. I mean, not mathematical complexity. We know that there's a way to track that sort of thing with numbers and circles and arrows and a paragraph on the back of each photo explaining what each one is. I'm talking about complexity in everyday life. Every so often I have a very odd work day when things get just a little more complicated than I'm ready for. Now, all I'm supposed to do is to prepare documents and attach them to emails, and all the documents have to be are reports and letters and invoices. And you know what? Just getting one of those things done is a little more complicated than it has to be. I think everything's a little more complicated than it has to be. Here's my reasoning. My work is mainly clerical, like I described earlier. You probably have, any other kind of work, including managerial work. But if you're doing a hands-on job like auto mechanics, how much paperwork do you have to handle? For how many people? For how many permits? And how many disclosures? And if you're doing a tax return, how many different kinds of income do you have to declare? How many deductions, not just for business insurance and for employee insurance and I don't know what all? I swear, just being an individual, I have sometimes given up halfway through filling out a tax return, bundled up all the source materials and half-done return, sent it to Canada Revenue, and actually included a note saying, "Here, you figure it out. I promise, but whatever you'd have you swear by, I'm not making this up." Anyway, it seems as though, and tax returns are actually a good example of this, different categories of information require different rules to process. Now, we handle this all the time, just speaking a language like English. Different words require different word endings, whether they're nouns or they're verbs, depending on which irregular class they belong to. At least it's English and not Portuguese. But my point is that this is all overcomplicated, and we just put up with it. Well, I put it to you that steadily, step by step, life has been getting more and more complicated. This is not news. Each step is more or less reasonable. This is not news. But it's getting to the point where it's more complicated than your average secretary, average citizen, or average business owner can quite keep track of. And this isn't news either. How did that creep up on us? Why do we let it creep up on us? Is there such a thing as work design? The balance between time and personal energy and attention and materials and the sheer weariness and frustration and frayed patience of dealing with all the complexities. Maybe it's simple. I just have to do with 3 or 4 steps where it should take 1 to create a document, or 5 or 6 steps where it should take 1 to complete an information database for a company. But there it is. Okay, who has the highest burden of complexity in everyday life? Perhaps the worst burden falls on the socially disadvantaged, especially the homeless. One of the ridiculous excesses of complexity is requiring homeless people to maintain paperwork in order to access social services when their possessions are regularly ripped off. Is this a system? What is expected? Who does the expecting? Come to think of it, has anyone anywhere measured complexity in everyday life terms, that is? I can almost feel what that measure would consist of. Has anyone seriously suggested that complexity exceeds what reasonably intelligent people can handle even those in the prime of life, without any cognitive deficits, without any income deficits. I suggest we better start thinking about it before the complexity of daily work and life exceeds any normal person's ability to cope with. Once again, this is the Garth Spencer Show for December 16th, 2019, and if you're entertained by the things that I come up with, feel free to subscribe.